They tried to sell his ranch while he was gone, not rent it. Not inspect it. Sell it. When he saw the listing online, his hands went cold, because the photos were real, the address was real, and the price was very real. A realtor banner hung on his front gate, and the description claimed the land was approved for transfer by the HOA. That was the promise everyone clicked on, and the lie that would soon collapse. The ranch had been in his family for decades, passed down with clear records and quiet pride. It sat just outside a growing development, close enough for the HOA to envy, far enough to stay free. Or so he believed. While he was away handling family business, someone decided his absence was opportunity. Neighbors later said unfamiliar people walked the property with clipboards, talking about boundaries and future plans. HOA officers told them the owner had defaulted on obligations and the land was being reassigned. It sounded official enough to stop questions. Authority often does. When he returned, the gate was unlocked, the sign removed, and tire tracks cut deep into the dirt road. He stood there in silence, not angry yet, just focused. Because mistakes happen. But lies leave fingerprints. He took photos of everything. The banner. The footprints. The listing screenshots. Then he made one call, not to the HOA, not to the realtor, but to a county office that had known his family name longer than that association had existed. What he didn't know yet was that the HOA had already crossed a line that could not be erased. And by trying to quietly sell what wasn't theirs, they had triggered a response far bigger than any meeting or warning letter. The next knock wouldn't be from an enforcer, it would be from people who don't ignore fraud. By the next morning, the listing was gone, but the damage was already spreading. Phone calls started coming in from confused neighbors asking why his land had been marked for sale. One even mentioned an HOA notice claiming the ranch had been reclaimed due to non-compliance. That was the moment confusion turned into something darker. He drove straight to the HOA office, screenshots in hand. The receptionist avoided eye contact and said the board was unavailable. When he asked who authorized the sale, the answer shifted every time. First, it was a paperwork mix-up. Then a misunderstanding. Then silence. Each excuse contradicted the last, and all of them sounded rehearsed. Later that afternoon, a certified letter arrived at his gate. It stated the HOA had temporary stewardship of the property due to unresolved boundary agreements. There were signatures at the bottom, but none he recognized. No deed reference. No county stamp. Just confidence printed on paper. He contacted the realtor listed in the ad. At first, she defended the sale, saying she had documents and approval from HOA officers. When he emailed proof of ownership, her tone changed instantly. She asked for time. An hour later, the listing vanished completely, replaced by an apology that felt more like fear. Behind closed doors, the HOA scrambled. Emails were deleted. Stories were adjusted. What they didn't realize was that public records don't disappear just because someone panics. He filed a formal complaint that evening, attaching every document, every image, every contradiction. The system responded quietly, automatically, and permanently. While the HOA tried to rewrite the narrative, a deeper review had already begun. And once authorities noticed the pattern, they wouldn't stop at one ranch. 2 days later, a county investigator requested a site visit. He didn't arrive with lights or urgency, just a clipboard and patience. He walked the fence line, measured markers, and asked careful questions. Each answer confirmed what the records already showed. The land was never under HOA authority, not even partially. Word traveled fast after that. HOA members began questioning leadership in online groups. Some demanded explanations. Others quietly admitted they had been pressured before, fined without clarity, warned without cause. The ranch was no longer an isolated incident. It was proof. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, closed to residents. That choice backfired instantly. Someone leaked an internal email showing discussion of temporary control strategies during owner absences. The language was casual, almost careless, as if property rights were suggestions instead of law. The investigator returned with a second official, this time from a different department. They requested records, authorization trails, and payment histories tied to the attempted sale. The HOA president insisted it was a misunderstanding caused by outdated maps. But maps don't list prices. People do. Meanwhile, the realtor submitted her own statement, explaining she had been assured everything was legal. Her cooperation added weight to the case. Intent began to matter. He watched all of it unfold from a distance. Refusing interviews, declining meetings. His silence forced others to speak. And the more they talked, the clearer the picture became. What started as a quiet land grab now carried the language of fraud. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable, and when authority is undeniable, consequences don't ask permission. The knock came just after sunrise, firm but respectful. Two officials stood at the gate, badges visible, paperwork organized. They weren't there to ask questions anymore. They were there to confirm conclusions. He invited them in, calm, prepared, and oddly relieved. They explained that the HOA's actions met multiple thresholds for investigation, including misrepresentation and unauthorized sale attempts. The word operation was used carefully, but it landed heavily. This was no longer a mistake by one person. It was coordinated. Later that day, vehicles arrived at the HOA office instead. Files were collected. Computers were secured. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Residents watched from a distance as authority shifted without argument. No shouting. No spectacle. Just process. The HOA president released a brief statement claiming cooperation and transparency. Within hours, that statement was contradicted by another board member who resigned publicly, citing ethical concerns. The cracks widened fast. He returned to the ranch and replaced the gate sign with a new one, professionally printed, listing parcel numbers and county verification. It wasn't defiant. It was final. As the sun dipped lower, he received one last email from the HOA's attorney. It requested no further contact, no meetings, no discussion. All matters, it said, would now be handled externally. That sentence told him everything. The power they once pretended to have was gone. And what remained was accountability moving forward without noise, but the real ending hadn't arrived yet. Because shutting something down is one thing, exposing how far it went is another. The investigation didn't end with the office doors closing. It expanded. Former HOA vendors were contacted, payment trails reviewed, and meeting minutes examined line by line. What surfaced was a pattern of authority stretched beyond limits, always quiet, always confident. Until now, several homeowners received letters confirming their fines had no legal basis. Others learned their properties were never officially part of the association. Shock turned into anger, but also relief. For the first time, someone had stopped the machine. The ranch owner was asked to give a formal statement. He agreed, not out of revenge, but clarity. He explained how the listing appeared, how the documents lacked county seals, how silence followed proof. His timeline matched the evidence perfectly. Authorities confirmed that similar tactics had been attempted before, just never challenged. People usually paid, complied, or walked away. This time, someone stood still. The HOA's legal representation withdrew days later. That move spoke louder than any denial. Without protection, board members began distancing themselves, resigning one by one, each claiming they were unaware of the full picture. But ignorance doesn't erase signatures. By the end of the week, the association's accounts were frozen pending review. Operations halted. Notices stopped. The neighborhood grew quieter, not from fear, but relief. And in that quiet, something settled in. Ownership isn't just about land. It's about knowing when to refuse being erased. The final report was still coming. And when it did, it would close more than just one case. The official findings were released on a Friday afternoon, deliberate and precise. They confirmed unauthorized actions, misuse of authority, and misrepresentation of ownership. No dramatic language. Just facts that carried weight. Enough to dissolve the HOA entirely. Residents gathered that evening, not to protest, but to understand what came next. Without the association, responsibilities shifted back to individuals. Roads, gates, rules, all returned to common sense instead of control. Several people approached the ranch owner, some apologetic, others grateful. They admitted they had believed the HOA's claims without question. He listened without judgment. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending something broken. The county reassigned oversight temporarily, ensuring no gap could be exploited again. New signage went up across the neighborhood clarifying property boundaries and individual rights. Transparency replaced intimidation. News outlets briefly mentioned the case, framing it as a warning. But most people would never hear the full story. And that was fine. The result mattered more than recognition. The realtor sent a final message thanking him for standing firm. She admitted that pressure from the HOA had been persistent, rehearsed, and convincing. It made her more careful. It made everyone more careful. As the sun set over the ranch, he walked the fence line one last time. Not to check boundaries, but to breathe. The land hadn't changed. Only the illusion of control had. Still, one last chapter remained. Because endings feel different when lessons are clear. Months later, the ranch stood exactly as it always had, quiet and unbothered. But the neighborhood around it had changed. People asked questions now. They checked records. They read before signing. Silence no longer meant agreement. The former HOA never reformed under a new name. Too many eyes were watching. Too many documents existed. The idea of quiet control had lost its power. What began as an attempted sale became a turning point. Not just for one property, but for an entire community that learned authority must be proven, not assumed. The ranch owner never posted victory signs or gave interviews. His response was simple. He kept his gate closed, his records clear, and his trust placed in facts instead of threats. In time, the story spread online, not as outrage, but as caution. A reminder that ownership isn't protected by confidence, but by clarity, and when people asked how it felt to stand alone against an entire system, he answered calmly. He never stood alone. The law was always there. It just needed someone to point to it. The land remained. The truth remained. And the noise faded, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.